Everyone, so I thought I'd give a quick update as I rinsed the t-shirt and the colour stayed, but once I put it in the wash it turned out to be this pale purple colour, and I think that's from not leaving the colour set for each layer between 6 to 8 hours. So I definitely recommend doing so for each layer of colour that you want to do. So I just thought I would try and add some of the black dye that I had left over to also see if you can keep the dye aside, as I know some of you had questions as to whether you could reuse it. So I'm currently doing the same process, adding the rubber bands to create the pinching patterns throughout the garment, and I'll add the black dye on to hopefully leave that for another 6 to 8 hours, leave it in a bag, and hopefully that will keep a lot better than what is kind of shown in this video. So I'm going to give a quick update. I'm going to do the mask as well. I think that's what I quite like about tie-dye though, is how unpredictable it is, and you kind of don't know the end results of certain products and how they'll take to certain fabrics. So I will show you later in the video another t-shirt that's a cotton blend, so it has some other fabric and fibres included in it, and you can see the results from that and how the dye takes to those as well. So I'm just adding some rubber bands again on there to make it tight. I think the contrast actually with the pale purple and hopefully the black will look really cool. So the more bands that I'm putting on, hopefully the tighter it will be. There'll be lots of purple splashes throughout there, as I didn't want it too dark. So we'll keep adding them tight. I'm trying to make them as even as possible as well, so you kind of get different, you don't get too much of one colour in the same area, it's all quite evenly spread. Again, I'm going to try the twist with the mask, but I think the surface area is too small, so what I've done is I'll try and do the twist on a t-shirt so you can really see the placement of the rubber bands to get that spiral effect that a lot of people want to achieve. So again, there's no real method to add in the dye. I'm just going to put the rubber bands on, pop both garments into the bucket, and I'm just trying to cover that surface area as much as possible for these ones, as I want an even spread between the purple and the black colour. And again, so what I'm going to do is put the dye on. Once I've put the dye on, is I'll put them in the carrier bag for 6 to 8 hours, leave it, rinse it, and then wash it in the washing machine and put it with other colours as well to make sure that you know that it's not going to run. So here we are, I have got the dye that was used in the tutorial video on Facebook, and I'm using the black here, even though the bottom looks purple, but the purple dye just spilled in the bag. It's definitely the black dye with the black tip on the lid. So I'm just adding it on here. I'm trying to get it as even as possible. I felt like I was going to run out, so I was just trying to add as much as possible on each kind of side and rotate it. And again, it's not supposed to be perfect, so even if you don't cover it, that doesn't matter because it's still just more of the other colour. But I wanted to try and get as much as possible to make it kind of even where the bands would sit. Again, I would recommend when doing this to wear gloves, as you'll see in a moment how stained my hands get, and it was a challenge to get it off, but I was just rushing to try and get an update so I could show you guys the kind of end results following the tutorial. So what I'll do is pop it in the bag. Here are the stained hands. And I'll start to take the rubber bands off now, and you'll be able to see the contrast, which is quite cool. So at first you kind of think, is it just the one colour? And you can't really see the inner purple, but as you can see here, as you start to remove them gradually, you'll start to see the cool contrast between the two colours, and we've got that kind of spacey look that you originally saw in the tutorial. So if we had done that with the pink first and then done the other colours on top, you definitely would have had that combination between the three colours that we included in the tutorial. But I'm not disappointed with the results. I really like this quite spacey look, and I like the colour contrast between the black dye and the light baby purple. I think it works really well. And I think to have a matching mask too, it's not gone too spirally, but it's got quite a cool effect in the middle. So I'm just rinsing it off here. So I would just keep rinsing it until the water runs clear, just to make sure that any fabric dye doesn't bleed into your washing machine or onto any of the garments if you're going to wash it with something else as well. Once I'd actually rinsed this, I did wash it in the washing machine with other garments, and it didn't bleed, it didn't ruin them. I didn't want to waste a load just on one t-shirt, and there was no issues at all. So as you can see, here is the finished product, and I'll show you it on so you can see what it looks like. As you can see, it's still quite spacey looking, but definitely is lightened in colour. But you can see the baby purple colour and the charcoaly black once it's been washed. And the face mask as well is matching, is quite cool. It's not quite the spiral, but it definitely matches the t-shirt, so that's quite cool. And I'll give you a close-up here. So next up, I thought I'd do the spiral. So as you can see here, I'm just pinching and twisting to one side to create that spiral shape. And I will just make this quite as tight as possible because that's what's going to create that colour in that shape. So if you want to just keep twisting, and then you want to kind of sandwich the edges in as much as possible, so when you put the bands on, they'll be quite tight and the spiral will keep its shape. So I'm just patting these sides in to try and make it kind of into a circle shape, and get one of the larger bands and put it round the edge, and then do it the other side almost like a parcel, and then you can just start to add bands on to make it tighter and make it more circular. And what I'm going to do is almost use the centre point with the rubber bands and just keep, again, doing that pizza slice technique that I mentioned in the tutorial, so just try and keep those triangles as even as possible, because that's what will give you a more balanced pattern once you put the dye on as well. As you can see, the rubber bands are now making it tight, it's becoming more circular, you can see the centre point, and it's kept that spiral shape really nicely. So it's definitely better to do this spiral technique with bigger garments. So you could definitely do it with pillowcases, or if someone you were on about bed sheets or curtains, if you did want to do the spiral, it's better to do it on a bigger garment like this rather than the mask. But as you can see, it's now becoming a lot more circular. You can see the slices and the triangles all throughout, and you can go as many or as little as you want, and this is kind of where I'm probably going to go, where it's kind of quite evenly spaced between those triangles. I think is a nice way to go. But again, it's entirely up to you how many rubber bands that you use. You can use more, you can use less, you can use thicker ones, you can use thinner ones, just to create in trial and error those patterns that you want to try. And it's cool to just see the results. So here is the finished product in terms of the bands, and now we'll start to add the dye. So I'm not actually sure if I'm going to have enough dye for the whole thing, so we'll start just by adding it kind of in the centre to make sure that that spiral is achieved. So I'm going to use the purple dye. We have about 25% left of it. So what I'll do is remove the cap and just try to sprinkle it on as much as possible. So I'm going to start in the centre and try and move out to make sure that I at least get the spiral, and then anything else can just kind of be splashed on with a bit of colour. So I'm really just trying to get that spiral centre. So just focus on where all your rubber bands cross in the middle and turn it over and do the same thing again. So you can kind of get that spiral on both sides. If that's what you want to achieve as well, you might only want the spiral on one side. But if you want it on both sides, just rotate the garment over so it's flat and do the other side. So I'll show you now. I've actually flicked around the edges because I started to think that it looked quite cool. So I made sure I did the inner circle by covering the print, and then started to splash the edges. So it kind of had this Dalmatian effect almost, that it was kind of blotchy and just kind of random with splodges. But I thought it looked quite cool as I was doing it, and I thought that was going to look better than trying to fill the whole garment and then running out of dye. So yeah, this was the technique that I went for, and I was really excited to see the end product. So I was going to leave this again for 6 to 8 hours in the bag, and you can kind of see here the purple that's taken to the white is definitely a lot brighter than the other one that had a lot of the other mix of dyes. So you can see here with the edges, it's really exciting how it's going to turn out, and we'll just leave that in the bag now for 6 to 8 hours for the dye to absorb. Any bag will do. You can just pop it in the corner, fold it and leave it to 6 to 8 hours, and then take off the rubber bands. And again, there's no process for the rubber bands, you just take them off as and when you can get to them. But actually the fabric and the colour for this one turned out really cool. Although I only used purple dye, it bled and it created pinks and it created blues, and that was just from one bottle. So you can kind of see the print here, but I'll do a close-up so you can see the finished garment and all the different colours that it turned out, which was really cool. So yeah, this is the second finished product, and that was using the dye on the second day as well, so you can definitely reuse the product. So I hope this helps everyone.